Recording in progress. Okay, so welcome again to everyone who's here and everyone who's watching this recording, or you who's here watching this recording again later. Sorry, I'm having a really beautiful time feeling into the energy of everyone on this call, and the energy of Matt and the energy of what is going to come through here. So Matt came on and he'll be on in a second. And as we're waiting for him, I'm going to make sure that everyone feels comfortable with the Zoom. And I'm assuming that everyone here, I guess I'm assuming that you're all comfortable with the Zoom, but just in case, I'm going to give you just a few rundowns of some things. We also just discovered today that it is possible for you to work the volume settings on your end next to the little audio button. There's like a drop-down menu, and so if you're struggling to hear, you can kind of go into that menu, set your preferences, turn up the volume of the speakers, the microphone, stuff like that. Welcome to who's ever on the phone. I know you can't see us, but there's a good amount of people on this call right now. So yeah, really excited. Let's see. So we are going to begin with Matt and I'm going to be asking him some questions that have come in over emails, and some questions that come up for us as when Matt and I were talking and planning this meeting. And where there's going to be a little dialogue between us, and also just Matt answering the questions I have for him, interview style. Then we're going to open it up to questions from all of you and dive into some conversation. And after that, Matt's going to lead us in a just introductory, short shamanic journey, just so we get a taste. So you get a taste of what we're talking about. And then we're going to open it up to some more questions or reports or reflections and conversation.
Hey.
Hi. Hey, Matt.
Hi, everybody. How you doing? Good to see you. Good morning, or wherever you are. Good afternoon. Good evening.
Yay, there you are. Okay. So I'm asking everyone to forgive if there's a little bit of, did I just disappear?
No, I see you.
Okay. So I had some water damage on my computer recently, and I'm a little iPad, and so I'm a little bit clunkier and not as graceful with working around some things. So please, your forgiveness on that. The one last technical thing, in case you're totally brand new to Zoom and don't know, is the raised hand function. That's how we're going to do question and answer and dialogue and conversation. So on your Zoom screen, there's a button that says participants with like a little shape of a human body. And if you click that, a box will come up, or a drop down of all the participants on this call. And at the bottom of that is a button that says raise hand. So if you click that, I'll see a little raise hand. I will call your name and unmute you. And if that's just not working and you can't figure that out and there's a pause, go ahead and unmute yourself and jump in. That's fine as well. If you are having any technical difficulties, at the bottom of the participant screen is a chat function, and you can chat with me as well. I'll be attempting to monitor that. I'm doing what I can. Okay, so this call is being recorded. I'm going to have to go in and out of speaker view and gallery view a little bit, but I'm going to do the very best I can to keep the recording on myself and Matt only. And during question and answer, the recording is going to be on Matt only. So you will be heard but not seen. Okay, Matt, okay. I could like read your bio and all that, but since this is an interview, why don't, share a little about yourself. You want to just start off? Is there anything you want to call to say about you to everyone here?
Sure. I guess I would just say, first of all, thank you so much for everybody for showing up. I see many familiar faces, and it's really kind of you to participate and to take part in this. This has been a long time coming, I guess. And then the first thing I guess I'd like to share is this morning, as I drew a card from a deck that I just got that I really like, and it says, "Answering the call. Now is the time," which I thought was sort of an interesting message from the other world. So to give you a sense of my background, I got kind of involved in sort of a shamanic lineage called Druidry many years ago, about 1993. And that was really, really fruitful for me. It's basically a Celtic system, comes out of England. And it was a long distance learning course, long before you would get things through the internet and all, the web or do Zoom. So they would send the packets across the ocean, literally, and you would only get 4 a month. And then you would work through them, but there was no timetable. It was, you couldn't really see what was coming. So that was my sort of introduction. And I had moved to Arizona, and I was looking for a path that would be connected to my ancestry. My father is English, my mother is Scottish, way back. So found that, and it was very fruitful. And it took about 7 years to go through that program. And it delivered me to a doorstep. And the doorstep was the recognition that although I had a lot of otherworldly or inner world guidance, and that lineage is very alive and real, and the wisdom that comes through it is very powerful, they were basically pointing me to, I needed to go explore some other stuff to get some essentially awakening technology, some capacity to break through consensus reality. So much like I had asked for the Druidic wisdom tradition to come into my life, I said, okay, well, bring me an awakening tradition. And I found a couple things over the next few years. One was a group called the Ascension Shaya monks, and I happened to meet one of them. And so they introduced me to these attitudes that were quite powerful. And then there was also the Kagyu lineage of Tibetan Buddhism, and that didn't come for another 6 or 7 years later. But long story short, those traditions kind of wove themselves into my life, and I learned after a little while that you can't really make yourself break through consensus reality, because you are the consensus reality. You're the problem. So there's a surrender process that has to take place, and or I don't know. There's a variety of ways of looking at it. So, anyways, I went through that process, and then was fortunate to sort of, or unfortunate enough to get to a place in my life where I didn't have kids yet, and I was utterly overwhelmed in my life. And so came across some pointing out instructions, which are traditional sort of Tibetan and Indian instructions for pointing out what's already always there and always has been. And they made me very angry. And that kind of was helpful, because after getting really, really angry at that, I was able to sort of surrender on a level I had never really surrendered before. And that led me to some insights, some basic insight into the nature of reality. So that was like in 2000, 2001, 2002. And then the rest of the time I've been sort of building a school, an art school, sort of integrating those insights into my life, and continuing to engage in the shamanic path as well, and seeing how the two relate. And the reason we're here today was because at some point I began to realize that as the West was coming into grips, or coming in contact with awakening traditions like I had done, and simultaneously coming into contact with recovering its own shamanic heritage, which has happened sort of contiguously with Michael Harner, who just passed away over the last 40 years, I realized the two weren't really speaking. And then when I went up to Chino Valley and was working with Garchen Rinpoche and seeing what they would do during empowerments, Tibetan Buddhist empowerments, is basically an extraordinary, elaborate shamanic ritual that is oriented towards helping people awaken. And I realized that they had never had those two things split. They had never gone through the process of, shunting off their shamanic heritage, and instead had been transformed and put to service to the intention of awakening. And I looked at that and I was like, well, why don't we have that? And there's there's lots of reasons historically, right? So, but the point was like, well, why can't we have that? Why can't we begin to engage with that now in our own way, as you know, Westerners who have mostly been disconnected from our shamanic heritage, who are rediscovering it. And my own experience is that the two are incredibly powerful, both in Tibetan Buddhism and in our own Western lineages of shamanism. I mean, why not have otherworldly beings who are essentially you on the deepest levels assist you in your own process of transformation, transfiguration, and awakening? Seeing as you can't do it yourself, ultimately yourself's in the way. So why not have these already enlightened beings do it? So just as a really simple example, you know, when you're doing an exercise with the Bodhisattva goddess Tara, you know, in Tibetan Buddhism, you would look at her, right? And you'd be like, oh, okay, there's this other being Tara, but she's not really another being, it's really you. But you bring her through the top of your head and into your heart, and then you arise as her. Well, why would you do that? What's the point if we're all one? Well, the point is Tara's way more evolved than we are. She's on a much higher level cosmically. She's like, you can, if you want to use a Jungian terminology, you think of her as an archetype, but that's a little bit less powerful than what she actually is. Mm-hmm. What happens is when she arises inside you, your own nervous system, your own view, your own perspective shifts. And you're able to hold or see and essentially embody and begin to transform your nervous system, the embodiment part of you, in a way that otherwise you're not going to do, because it's just not going to happen. And there are analogies in Western sort of Christian mystic symbolism as well. You know, there's a variety of mystics that would end up having a relationship with Christ and essentially feel merge with him mm-hmm. and arise as him. And it's like, so this technology is essentially shamanic, because in shamanism, you go into the other world, you find otherworldly beings, and you merge with them, and you come back in shamanism with, you can call it energy, you can call it power, you can call it perspective. I would say it's probably all those things. And that energy, perspective, and power shifts you and allows you to function in the world in a way that lines up, I would just call it, all the worlds. Mm-hmm. And it turns out human beings are totally capable of doing that. Maybe we're even designed to be able to do that. Mm-hmm. We just happen to live in a time in Western civilization where we've sort of cut ourselves off from the other worlds, which is fine. It's nobody's fault. I mean, it's been an interesting ride for the last 400 years. It's given us all kinds of incredible things. But why not have all those incredible things like our technology and our, you know, our mechanistic world, and also have the other worlds lined up so that we can increase our transformation and potential for moving forward. So having done it in the Tibetan system, and I still do, I started applying those same principles with the shamanic tradition of the West. And which is, you know, everybody has their own approach to the shamanic tradition of the West. I mean, it might be Celtic, it might be Norse, it might be Romanic, it might be Greek, you know, it could be Middle Eastern. I mean, in any part of the world has their own. African, I mean, I have a good friend whose mom is an African shaman. And for many of them, much like the Tibetans, they never lost, you know, their connection to this part of reality. Mm-hmm. So that's how I got here. That's how we got here. Is this exploration of bringing non-duality and shamanism together. Because part of what I see missing in the non-dual movement is access to this sort of essentially sacro-magical, shamanic, ritualistic, ceremonial capacity that could allow you to do a variety of things to your body-mind that will make it easier to hold or embody the view. Yeah, embody the view. Yeah, you know, and you know, what really first gave me the perspective of it was actually Peter Fenner, about, I don't know, 10 years ago, long before we had Zoom and everything. He had done a little, like 3 free sort of, I don't know, you could get them off Sounds True or something, but it was like 3 talks or visualizations or meditations he gave away. Mm-hmm. And one of them was, I mean, he spent 9 years being a Tibetan monk, so he knows exactly what we're talking about here. And I would just walk. I would go for a walk, and he would lead through this meditation, and like it was like I was downloading energy that would transform my nervous system. And he pretty much said it would. He was like, "Yeah, you're gonna feel more joy. You're gonna feel more happiness." You know. And I was like, "What is going on here?" You know. So it was like from there that I was like, I think there's more we can do here. You know, because we've been studying and working on this kind of non-dual thing, you know, really intensely for the last, say, 100 years, and maybe the shamanic thing about the last 40, 45 years. So, so here we go, right? So that's how we got here. Yeah.
Yeah, that's how we got here. Yeah, this split has been hurting my soul and hurting my heart. So it is, that's why it's feeling so good to me to be able to talk about it and to be able to just highlight and point out some of the, God, some of the, just to kind of slow down a little bit and put attention and awareness on where we've gotten a little bit confused um, around this split. I guess I'll say that. And I also want to chime in that the lineages that I come from, in, like, let's say I'm sitting in India and it's the same kind in India exactly. There's never been a difference. There's
That's
never
right.
separation from all the worlds and the absolute. So one question that came in today that I think really highlights this misconception that's been happening in the West as we dive into the non-dual teachings, kind of goes like, the question was like, and it's so beautiful, it's so beautiful, and it highlights so perfectly what we're talking about, and it goes like, non-duality has pointed to dropping all concepts and resting as the void. And you and I talked about this too, Matt, the other day. And then there's this kind of idea in the West that shamanism is like about concepts or about form. It's not about the void. So there we can see that split right there, splitting up the absolute, the void, the oneness, and the entire world form as if they're two different things or as if they're separate. But then the question goes on to say, but I sense that these are just descriptions of the natural energies as they arise. And so the split between this idea of shamanism and this idea of non-duality, I feel like also points to a subtle hair split that can happen in awakening that says there's the void, which has no concepts, which is separate from the world of form, instead of that the world of form and the emptiness are one, polarizing together always. They can't be split.
Mm-hmm.
It gets, and I can see you want to respond here too. I want to say one more thing, and then I'll get over to how you would respond to this. The subtlety that I've experienced around merging with a much more evolved consciousness in form, the subtlety of being able to merge with Tara's consciousness without losing the awareness that I am that and there is only one and I am this too, is tricky. It's very advanced. I just wanted to say that. So easy. And that the point of merging with Tara's consciousness is so that I can know I am this evolved consciousness. Tara is me. I am that, to be basically for myself, so that I'm knowing deeper and deeper who and what I am by merging with all these bigger consciousnesses that also know they are only one, that they are only that. But it gets subtle. I guess that's all I want to say. It can get very, very tricky, and there's such a value, I think, in almost knowing dropping all the concepts first and knowing the self as only one, so that we go out to continue to expand. We don't get confused about the ultimate truth while we're working in these lineages. Yeah, what would you say to that?
Couple things come to mind. I think the first is that subtle is the right word, and we use it. If you really look at what subtle means, we're talking about something that is very subtle is hard to see. So oftentimes as the awakening process unfolds, the mind will perceive reality, and then it will begin to sort of rest there, and there's this oscillation where you go back between resting there and then back into form. And what's not really seen are the subtle containers of self that spontaneously arise from the unconscious. So for instance, you can sit in meditation and you can sense, see, whatever we want, perceive, embody the non-dual spaciousness. And at times, there can be tremendous clarity. And then you get up and you have to take your dog for a walk, and you run into, someone on the street, and what instantly arises is a subconscious container that you can't even perceive yet, because you just can't. And it holds the conversation you're having, the perception of reality you're having, all, form and everything else, and gives it a direction and meaning. And these subtle forms are very difficult to see. If they were easy to see, then it would be much easier to stay clear. And so the first point is that all of it is the same thing. All of form is an ornament of reality. There is no distinction. You can look at an object and perceive and sense that it is awareness looking back at you. It's just that our body mind is designed so that we don't bump into walls, and we don't, so we have an operational system that allows us to make concrete objects out of, energy systems that are coming through our eyes, and good thing, otherwise we couldn't function, So getting involved with, say, Tara or any other real subtle deific form allows you to take on a view, like you said, and see things arise in a way that you might not otherwise. So, for instance, if I go into a meditation with Tara, I can sense when I'm starting to become her, and her view allows me to perceive the other aspects of myself.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
And these subtle aspects. So, like, for instance, when Lama Surya Das was awakening, and he was in France, he was working with his teacher, and he came in, and he, had discovered that he was, it was arising as Tara and other beings. And he, his teacher was like, yeah, you're starting to discover who you are on another level. And he's like, and the point is to, you don't stop there, but by not stopping there, and by perceiving that all of that is also form, it doesn't invalidate those forms. Form is a manifestation of this reality we're talking about. So there's a subtle split, because there's a very, very subtle container that arises when our egos form. And that container is quite difficult to look through, to see through. It is possible, and it is possible in your day-to-day work to do it. But there are techniques that you can put into place. But most of the time, we are essentially acting as actors on stage. We run into another actor, and you think about, say, theater and method acting, and when someone's doing a really good job on stage, they really believe they're the character. So the way consensus reality runs is that, if you're doing a really good job at being you believe you're you, and you believe the other person is them. That makes you a good actor. It doesn't make you a very good non-dualist. So there's this ironic twist that most of consensus reality of us interacting with other beings, the underlying container is an intention that you are you and you are not me, and that we will interact. And even that idea is a manifestation of the non-dual. So it's in and of itself. And so, but if you can see that one, arising, and the conditioning that generates it, then you have options. You just have options. And that option is to see through that container arising inside you and go, oh, and see the radiant presence that is the container and is everything around it. And then the interaction changes with the being that's opposite you, with the action that's opposite you. It's like popping out of being a character on stage and remembering that you're an actor. You're actually the actor, the only actor. The challenge in our life is that when you run into people, that's not happening most of the time. Almost, yeah, like we can do it now. I'll just go into, whatever it's called, gallery mode. And it's like, right now, there's a container running inside of me that sees all of you as separate beings. Okay, everybody drop it right now. Just drop the container for a second. There is no you. Like, erase your name. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's just an idea. There's actually only one person, one awareness present in all these marvelous structures. If you look carefully, you'll notice that the subtle container holds a possessive idea that your awareness only belongs to you, like uniquely. It's a misapprehension of a 2-year-old mind. The 2-year-old mind perceived itself and awareness, and then it was like, oh, it must be mine. It took possession of it, much like 2-year-olds will take possession of anything. You know, like, I want that cookie, I want that toy, it's mine, not yours. So that little container right there continuously creates this idea that your awareness, which is everybody's, is actually only yours. It's subtle, and we are constantly reinforcing it by using things like you, I, you know, whereas if you just subtly drop it, it's like, oh, there's like a spaciousness that opens up. I mean, how nice it is to just not have to be you for a minute.
The little you.
Yeah, because the little you is like a 2-year-old or 1.5-year-old that wants to like grab a hold of the whole damn cookie jar.
Right.
There's a lot of energy in that, you know.
But then I actually get to be me, the me that's always here, that never comes and goes. I actually get to really be self.
Right. The irony is that when the subtle concept is dropped, that the character that's been created doesn't vanish. It's a pretty elaborate structure, you know. And the goal here is not to get rid of the character. The goal is to recognize that you're actually the presence through which that is looking through the character, which just makes you, ironically, a better character, because you're the stupid stuff in your character that's annoying, that drives everybody crazy, and yourself, and suddenly you have choices around it because you can sense it and see it. You know, there was this great moment when I first was sitting in front of Garchen Rinpoche where he was explaining this. I mean, got up there and he's speaking in Tibetan, but his translator was great. And he sits down and he goes, you know, there's no one here in the room. And when someone like at that level of realization says that, it's like a wave moves through the room. You just undermined our entire English pronoun structure. And you just like, there's a palpable, oh, yeah. And all of a sudden there's a conversation taking place between all the different aspects of that awareness. And then he closed that conversation with saying, you know, here we are as one having a conversation, but if one of you got up and ran at me with a bat and tried to hurt me, he's like, I can't guarantee you that I wouldn't forget. Mm-hmm. So he's pointing to the power of embodiment to pull us out of that awareness.
Mm-hmm. Does it really pull us out of the awareness, or the awareness comes back into the embodiment and is aware that it is that in that unique form, in that unique container? So,
yeah, it's almost like it gets stuck inside the container. You know?
Yeah, that's, I think, what we were talking about, the power of non-duality and shamanism. There are shamanic lineages that don't, where the direct realization of the oneness is imbuing the form. It isn't imbuing necessarily the work being done in all the different worlds on all the different levels. Maybe there's such a power. I guess something you had said in our conversation before was how powerful it is, how much more power when we're doing work in other realms, how much more powerful it is when the essence of what we know is the non-conceptual, when the essence of what we know is the formless.
Yeah, I mean, it changes things. When you go into the inner world and you meet with a deity or an animal, you know, like meeting with all of you guys, it starts from consensus reality of the sense of respect of the otherness of that being there. But you can imagine what happens when in shamanism, there's a lot of merging with beings. So, you know, what's the basis for that? Well, if the belief is that we're separate, ultimately, then it becomes kind of a, you know, dicey phenomena. Mm-hmm. But if it's we're actually sharing the same consciousness and awareness, there's immediately an opening, a compassion, a love. And so two forms are coming together to augment each other in a symbiotic way, which is, you know, how the whole universe is functioning. It's all symbiotic. So, you know, you work with beings that are full of love and compassion. And in a shamanic terminology, this would be power and energy. Well, and the reason you do that is because as a human being, you can absorb that energy and power and bring it out into the outer world and create. Ultimately, you can create, you can heal, you can transform and transfigure. And so having the non-dual as the basis, the awakened state as the basis, gives you a tool to help you connect with other beings and transform. I mean, the Tibetans call it ultimate medicine for a reason. It's not because it only allows you to see through the delusion, but particularly when you're working in your own private inner world with your own subconscious stuff, and also if you're, say, working with something from the outer world that you're contending with in the inside. So let's say, I'll give you a classic example. Let's say you have a disagreement with someone, another being, and you are struggling, you're having an emotional mental reaction, and that's challenging for you, or, it could be a contemporary one, or you could just be thinking about something from your past, either one. And you get to the place where you're like, okay, I'm ready to, I'd like to transform this. So the value of the ultimate medicine is really, really practical and simple. You go into your inner world and you draw up that person in your imagination. And typically your body mind's going to be triggered. You have emotions, you're angry, you're annoyed with that person. You're annoyed with yourself that you're annoyed with them. I mean, it goes on and on, right? Then if you can actually look through them, and in Tibetan it's called seeing through, if you can look through them, then the attachment to them as an object that you can be angry at, it almost starts to feel like a joke. You're like, it's like being angry at a character in a book, which I'm sure we've all done, right? You're reading a book and you're like, oh my God, why are they doing that? And then you get angry at the author for writing the character that way, and it's like, and then at some point you put down the book and go, oh my God, okay, dude, it's just a book. If you can see through, then the attachments and anger and frustration that are attached to the other being, they dissipate. They can vaporize. And what's behind it becomes compassion or love. So something, that Jesus said starts to make some sense. Love your enemies. Well, how are you going to do that? Well, you do that by seeing through and by looking at them. So typically in consensus reality, you would look at them and blame them, and then your shadow would have all these projections, and then you would feel right and they would be wrong, and you would inflate your ego and walk out and be like, here's my plan to mess them up, or I'm so right. And all of it just generates suffering. So in the inner world, the capacity to go in and draw someone up and see through them is very powerful. Now, let's say you can't do that entirely on your own.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
Right. Then you work with your inner allies.
That's a very, very seeing. Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about the allies. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What you're speaking to is a very, very deep seeing of ultimate reality and ultimate truth. And another question came in today about trauma, because I know for me.
About what? I missed that part.
Trauma.
Uh-huh.
In the body and mind. So until I healed the energetic contraction in my energy field, in my body mind container, that deepest view of the ultimate truth of my nature and the nature of all reality was not possible.
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure that, because anything we can't anyway. It's not bypassable. It's a deep seeing, and until a lot of the contracted energy of trauma in my body was released, that's what allowed this consciousness here to recognize itself all, which is it's a really trippy thing. So there was a question today about trauma, and it was actually really, for me, getting into, for some reason, yeah. For me, getting into having to really heal very, very deep layers of contracted energy in my body, mind, a very contracted pain, is when the work with my guides in the animals in this realm, in the earth realm, became extraordinarily valuable. When I started working with my allies on all levels, on all the different levels, but especially I think what you would call the lower world. And I'd love for you to explain that too. You mentioned that in your article, lower world, middle world, higher world. And I have what I understand about that, but I'd love to hear from you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's where this became, being able to work with my allies and my guides in lots of different forms to support the trauma and not rush me to the deepest sea, because so
Yeah.
it can actually be really painful, you know, to force ourselves to see something that's not possible. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So here are some of the great advantages of taking a shamanic approach. And I just want you to imagine that, like, you know, like I said, there are various parts in the world where these traditions are not separate yet. So once you've made a connection to your inner world allies, you have vehicles for transformation and transfiguration that keep you moving on a path that is not essentially orchestrated by the ego or by someone else. It's really being orchestrated, you know, by your own soul and the connection of that soul to these deeper, you know, beings. So, for instance, in shamanism, typically most people will have an animal that is their fundamental sort of connection to the inner world. And then in Celtic shamanism and in Tibetan as well, you then will connect and create a relationship with what's often called your spirit spouse. It's represented often by a horse in Tibetan, but also in what's called the she in the Celtic tradition. So you start to have essentially an augmented reality, almost like an entourage, a spiritual entourage of helpers that allow the mortal person to go through transformative stuff to deal with the trauma. I mean, everybody's filled with contractions, bazillions of them, right? And so if you just blaze through from a spiritual perspective, there are all kinds of risks to the psychology of the individual. I mean, some people do it. I mean, you look at someone like Eckhart Tolle, and it's like, you know, he just like had a meltdown, you know, or someone like Byron Katie. It's the same thing. It's a complete and total meltdown and rebuild. Well, that's not really a solid methodology for the rest of the world. You know, I mean, thank goodness they did. They can be wonderful teachers. But, you know, your average person needs to be able to go through a transformative process that allows the planet to continue to function. Right. You know, I mean, you know, we can't all sit on a bench and not be who we are for the next 2 years and think that something's going to arise out of that. Nor are all of us going to end up being spiritual teachers. You know, I mean, we need engineers, we need doctors. I mean, life needs to go on in order the human experiment to unfold. So the shamanic perspective gives you these allies and then essentially gives you a path. So you go into your underworld, you know, there's a lower world, a middle world, and an upper world. And they're not good or bad. They're just, think of like a tree. A tree has roots and it has, like, you know, branches and flowers and stuff like that, and a trunk in the middle. And, you know, you go into your underworld in order to interact with powerful beings from the underworld and allow them to lead you into the experiences of integration and transfiguration that you currently need to work on. You know, so how do you know what you need? Well, it's not that complicated. You know, you just look at what's arising in your outer world. So let's say you're struggling with issues around, you know, your parents, or, you know, they're driving you crazy, or they're dying, or your neighbor or something. Well, you go into the inner world and you work with your allies to do two things. One is, how is this about me? How can I transform my own view? And then also, how can I practically transform it out in the outer world? Because there's always a corollary, right? If you're being affected by something in the outer world, it's because there's a mirror, there's a resonance inside you. And some of them are real baseline stuff, like really loud noises, you know, they hurt. You know, so some of it's really baseline body-mind stuff, but some of it's not, you know, and you can see that on a day-to-day basis. So developing inner world allies allows you to take on the process of transfiguring your trauma. The only thing I would suggest is that you do that in the context of as much as possible, is working with a community or working with other people who can support the process. You know, the shamanic teaching I do is largely empowering other people to develop a shamanic practice and a shamanic way of life. Mm-hmm. You know, because that's been my experience. So I'm not, like, for instance, a full-time like shamanic healer, like a doctor, like in an old school kind of tribal setting. I mean, my path is as a leader. And so the goal for me has always been to work with people to help them develop the tools to do this transfiguration work. And you then have an ally in the upper world. And that could be Tara, that could be Odin, that could be Jesus, that could be Buddha. It might be someone you don't expect. You know, it might be the first time I went to the upper world, the only way I could deal with dealing with a powerful upper world being was to have the being show up as Yoda. Because as a child, Yoda was the only wise person I'd ever heard of.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, so I go into the upper world and there's this little teeny dude with his little thing tapping, you know, and then like he'd tell me crap and like, you know, and I'd be transfigured. And of course he would talk in that funny way, you know, that Yoda talks, you know, and so, you know, the way in which you interact with the inner world is using your imagination. That's the tool of our consciousness that allows us to interact. I mean, we're not actually seeing spiritual beings as they actually are, whatever that would actually mean, how they see each other, who knows, right? It all depends on the body mind of whatever vehicle consciousness is looking through. So,
anything in this world actually is either.
Yeah, I mean, how does a fish see us when it comes to the surface of the water? I mean, good, you know, there's no way to know. I mean, they probably know now, right? But, but you know, so my point is that it's important not to get hung up on the idea of like, oh, is this just in my mind? It's like, well, yes, everything's just in your mind and the mind of the whole universe. So there's a process through which you can validate whether things are happening and have real resonance and power and you're working with the inner world. That's why it's important to work with someone else that you can connect with. There are ways of knowing. For instance, there are certain symbols, powerful symbols that begin to show up. And when they do, and a bunch of people go on the same journey and a bunch of them come back and the same symbol occurred. So you get a kind of almost scientific method about like testing and making sure that you're not just stuck in your own private inner world fantasy, you know, and yet the same tools of daydreaming are used, imaginative tools, to go into that inner world, connect with beings of power and energy that are compassionate, that you want to work with, call them compassionate teachers, compassionate whatever, and they help transfigure that trauma. The more you do that and you unload the junk that's inside the nervous system, the easier it becomes to potentially perceive ultimate reality. There's less stuff in the way, you know? I mean, some people just see it from the get-go, you know, and they have really explosive, powerful experiences. I honestly, I'm not sure I would wish that on anybody. It's really, I mean, I know
that's the first path. It's a hard path.
It's a hard path. I know several people, young people, who've ended up in the hospital for 2 or 3 weeks, you know, telling the doctors that, no, you and I are both God. And they're like, okay, well, we need to take this pill, you know, because that's not true. And then
that was my life.
Yeah, how do you explain that to them? And they were like, because you inherently know and they don't know, and you're telling them and you're like insisting because it's such a powerful intuition that overwhelms you. And they're like, okay, she's, you know, completely lost her sense of reality. She's lost her ego. And the intention is good, you know, it's just the wrong set of, sometimes it's the wrong doctor. You know, you might need a different doctor, or you might need a combination of that kind of doctor and a shaman. And then, but like, so I mean, they're all separated in our culture. You know, the medical doctor, the non-dual doctor, and the shamanic doctor all come from very different lineages in our Western tradition. And some of them are not very developed yet. So the value of this tradition of shamanism is the transformative work that allows those contractions to decompress.
Yeah.
So that it's easier to get to the ultimate medicine.
Yes, and I also say that what the value of resting in pure awareness, having that practice and that clarity has actually helped, has actually changed experiences, let's say, or working with all of these other forms.
Absolutely.
So dramatic shift, the deeper my own resting in pure awareness and spaciousness of consciousness I've gone into, the much clearer the journeys, so to say, are. The much clearer when a form shows up, the wisdom and the medicine that's coming from another being that's speaking and supporting me. Mm-hmm. There is no doubt. It doesn't feel like mine. There's no like, am I making this up or not? There's a clarity of knowing what's going on when I'm journeying in lots of different realms and lots of different dimensions. It's like the compass of the indestructibility of my own consciousness, the durable presence of my own consciousness, the basic, the ground
The ground, yeah.
is what has allowed me to journey into all these different realms, experience tremendous exchanges with beings, and it goes on and on and on, deeper and deeper. But without the ground of consciousness, without the ground of heart, without the ground of true understanding of my ultimate nature, I wouldn't be able to navigate the vastness of these different worlds.
Yeah, there's a reason
That's
it's called diamond consciousness, because it's
yeah.
indestructible. And when you know yourself as that,
Yes.
it's much easier to confront your own shadow material, something that's dark, something that's difficult. I mean, there's something in shamanism, you guys, that's like difficult for the modern Western mind to comprehend. And so, for instance, one of the basic things that happens in shamanism is dismemberment and the destruction of the self. So you go into the underworld, and I can't tell you how many times I've fallen down a dark tunnel and landed on a pile of spikes and been ripped to pieces in the inner world. So symbolically, since the whole inner world is a symbolic system, what's taking place is the transformation of the self and having to be ripped into pieces so that you can be put together again. When you understand it that way, it's not that complicated. But when it first shows up in your inner world, you're like, what the hell is going on? You know, why am I being ripped apart by sharks in the bottom of the ocean in front of this skeletal goddess? Mm-hmm. Well, because she's actually helping. You know, and when you look at it in, like, you know, the Tibetan system, I know if anybody knows any about how their system works, you know, you have all these bodhisattvas, right? And then they have different versions of themselves. And some of them are like these incredibly demonic looking versions of them. Those are the most compassionate ones. They all have the same mind. They all have the same pure awareness, but those are the ones that actually will shred you so that you will release your contractions and become larger than you were. And here's the thing, you are not in charge of that process. You have to be willing to throw yourself into the pit of spikes and submit yourself and be shredded and destroyed and everything. And then you will be put back together. You don't get to even see how that happens or even necessarily notice how you've changed. So, you know, after going through that 1,000 times, you're no longer the same person. You've been put together. Your body mind has been shifted. And there's a physical component as well, right? You know, you could see people going through the same process if they're really into yoga or into dance or something like that. The physical movements can also release the contractions, which then ultimately affects the personality, which ultimately affects your capacity to see your own diamond nature. But you're right. I think doing both simultaneously, having an introduction to the non-dual and being able to begin to sense your way into that while simultaneously working with the shamanic gives you this double, like, pincher system for transformation and possible embodiment.
Yeah, and embodiment. Both the complete awakening and embodiment. Really.
At the same time. Yeah.
Absolutely. So there are a bunch of awesome questions coming in via chat, via email. And I will definitely speak for the written in questions, but I also want to offer the chance for people to raise your hand and just ask any question sent in, in person. So I do want to, I'll just say that, let's see, let's start here. Someone wanted us to go back to, if we can't see through someone by ourselves, how to call inner for support in the moment. So my response to that is that we're going to get to a actual practice that Matt's going to lead us to, so that we can just get a taste of what it's like to begin to find these places in ourselves of inner support.
And I can give you a quick answer, though. It's something that comes from Sandra Ingerman, who, if you've never heard of her, she's one of the great shamans of our day, Western woman. If you can't quite see through yet, there is a really simple technique that she uses. So, like, let's say you're looking at an enemy or someone you're frustrated with. So the result of seeing through in the heart is compassion. So one of the ways to emulate it or fake it till you make it, okay, is that she uses, which is quite powerful, is you bring up in your imagination your enemy or whatever it is, right? And then you kind of place that person over there to the left. And then you bring up in your imagination something or someone that you have this tremendous compassion or tender love for. And it could be a memory. You know, you're evoking a memory of tenderness and love. And then what you do is you bring that person or image of tenderness or love into your heart center. You imagine it sitting there and filling your whole being. And then you imagine the person that you have trouble with or situation across from you, and you transfigure them into that feeling. You literally imagine in their heart center the same thing that you love that is now in your heart. So in the Tibetan system, it would be, I'm imagining Tara inside my heart and in the heart of the other person. So you've evoked, by imagining something that you really love, you've evoked the feeling of the result of awakening inside yourself. Mm-hmm. A kind of tenderness, a spaciousness, a openness, the dropping of the dualistic tension of self or other. And the result of that is just tapping into, you know, pure love. So you start from the dualistic version of that, and you extend it to that other person, and you begin to practice it, and it transfigures. They become what you love. Now, obviously, that's going to create some dissonance inside you, but that's the point, is that you're processing, you're transfiguring the attachment you have to that other person. And as you're doing it, you're having to depersonalize your story about how they were wrong. It's like there, I don't know if you're familiar with Byron Katie's work, but there's this really beautiful thing in her work where she talks about looking forward, absolutely looking forward to the thing you can't stand the most. Mm-hmm. And when you do that, your brain can't really handle it. And it like combusts and breaks and lets go of things. So if you take an image of someone you really despise or don't like, and you combine it with sound feeling of someone you love, and you combine the two, guess what your brain does? It can't handle it. Mm. And it decompresses. You need to be prepared. I mean, you may start crying, you may start screaming, you may start shaking. There are bodily responses to this stuff that are totally normal, you know, because you're holding tension in your body about how much you don't like this other person or circumstance. And then you're just combining it with a thing that actually you love, which is a way of kind of taking tension and the two things that are opposed in your body and putting them together. And then out of it comes a kind of transformative breaking apart of energies. And so, I mean, you can do this with, so that's how I would say start with it. Do you know what I mean? Is you take that thing that you're in love with or have great feelings with, and you use it as the base. And especially if you're a heart-based person, this is a great way to start. You know, all right. So that's the.
I also want to throw in just addition to that's so powerful, and it's something that I have been able to do. And I want to throw in that I also use my guides, and I use inner, there are specific animal energies that are in my own world that I kind of engage to help me first before I do a big transformative process like that. So I have this shaman, skunk, just say it, and he's amazing. And he has this little den or this little hut forest, and he'll take a part of me that's feeling very fragile or feeling very scared or feeling very traumatized, let's say by this person that's bothering me, and he'll tend to it and he'll heal it and he'll keep it safe. Mm-hmm. Other allies that use smoke to create protection and healthy defense. So there's like a lot of different things that I do first in a way to tend to all these little pieces of myself. There's a part of me that like needs the butterfly to keep telling it in its ear it's loved and it's safe. There's so many different energies that I call upon almost in a way before I do a super transformative, like a power like, you know.
Yeah, typical shamanic transformation begins with shamanic ceremony.
Yeah.
Once you've taken a basic course, and you can look at, for instance, like I said, there are some Sounds True shamanic courses that are on CD that you can do. Mm-hmm. Also ones through the Shift Network where you can work with someone live like Sandra Ingerman. Once you begin to populate your inner world and it becomes more viscerally real for you, your allies become natural to you. So for instance, I'm out there working in my school every day and I'm going into a difficult meeting. I'm immediately aware that there's an enormous lion walking next to me.
Right.
And I'm like, oh yeah. And she's like powerful, and she brings that confidence and powerful and merges it in with me. Mm-hmm. And it puts me in a different place. which actually allows me to use the non-dual medicine when I'm present.
Exactly.
So imagine this. I was explaining this to someone the other day. Like, what's the point of all this? Like, well, why would you do this? It seems like a whole lot of time for what are you doing? I said, like, imagine what it's like to be like a rock star of any kind, and you have an entourage. And the purpose of that entourage is to carry all your shit, open the door for you, and constantly make you feel confident, like to whisper in your ear, like, you know, you see some, you know, person as you're going into your concert and someone's like, I hate your music. And someone turns to you and says, don't listen to them. You are fantastic. You're going to do great tonight. I mean, if you have an entourage that is keeping your power and your confidence in a place that allows you to take on challenging stuff. I mean, not so you become an egotist. I mean, that would be the bad version of it. Do you know what I mean? That the person who's disconnected from reality, and they're not going to do that to you, you know. But they will give you energy and power that allow you to take on things that are difficult. You know, going and having Thanksgiving with your challenging relatives. Wouldn't it be nice if you had the confidence and the power to actually be compassionate and wise instead of falling into patterns that have always been with you? Or even if you do fall into the pattern, you know what to do. You can leave the room and you watch your mind go through this crazy little loop of like, now you're 9 years old again kind of thing. And it's like, and your quote animal shows up and you're like, oh, okay. So it's a way of augmenting your capacity to move through life in a way that otherwise, you know, life is wicked challenging and you're on a roller coaster all the time and, you know, never really living up to your potential. There is this thing, you guys, in the Celtic system, and it probably shows up in a bunch of other places, called the Threefold Alliance. And the principle is that every human being is supposed to actually have a symbiotic relationship with an inner world animal and an inner world spouse. And that without that, we are actually at a major loss. Yeah. You know, it's like the fact that we can function at all is amazing. That we are beings created to be in symbiotic relationship with inner world beings, and that they are always waiting for us. In fact, most of them are there all the time. We're just not drawing upon their energies.
Yes, thank you for saying that. That is so deeply how it feels. Like it's like hard to believe that I was trying to do any of the path of awakening and of embodiment
on your own.
Yeah, it has felt like these limbs missing, and also the awareness that these are functions. They're functions of consciousness, almost like I experience them like math equations. Like everything is a math equation, specifically programmed or written to perform a certain function or a certain code for the whole. To awaken.
It's like us.
When it helps the realization of oneness in play to wake itself up. To be in what did you call it? Symbiotic relationship with these beings. Like, their function is to support everything in this sea of consciousness is a function to support the awakening.
Well, think how we take it for granted.
And we take it for granted.
Think how we take it for granted that we have bacteria in our gut that makes it possible for us to digest food. There are creatures living inside you symbiotically right now. And we're like, well, yeah, cool. Yeah, man, I don't really know what that means. But it's like they're alive and well. Do you know what I mean? And so we live that way. So the idea that there would be spiritual beings that are also living with us symbiotically to help us to live successfully on the earth, it's not like real radical. It's just that our level of development as Western civilization, where we are, is we've cut ourselves off largely from that world. Because we're very rational. And like I said in the thing I wrote, I don't think there's anything broken about that. I think it's broken, but there's nothing broken about the fact that we went through that as a a species that we're going through that. It's just that it's time to come back. Potentially it's time to come back and reconnect to those forces and powers so that we can function even better than we function with just our technology. Because, you know, obviously we're having some issues, you know, with our technology. And I mean, I like technology, but I mean, I also like the technology of the inner world. You know, I don't see them as really separate. I see that the great technological leaps were actually people having connections to their inner world and being inspired and bringing them out into the outer world.
Wow, beautifully said. Thank you.
All right, so
that is why we're both feeling called. I think we both got so excited, and we feel this energy that really does want to come back and need to come back at this time. Um,
So do you have another, is anybody want to raise their hand or have another question?
yeah, we have a hand and we have a couple other questions. And I also,
And then we should take
yeah,
five.
let's go to this question that was written in. And I'm going to say it's from Kristen. Unless, Kristen, you would like to raise your hand and ask it in person, I can read what was written. Maybe I'll go ahead and do that now unless I see your hand pop up. And I do just want to say that this is a tiny, tiny little, we're covering a lot and we're covering some really deep stuff and things that take a really long time to cultivate and learn in a short amount of time. So this really is just a sample, is a process to be able to go into and develop all this in a really real way for ourselves. So let's see here. For years, I've been embracing Buddhism and non-dual tradition. Can you say more about the anger you experienced when hearing the pointing out instructions? What has seemed like a conundrum for so long is to make sense of how the teachings of simplicity are true. Then there seems to be a conundrum between the simplicity that's true and all the layers of complexity.
Oh, that's a great question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, the traditions, Ken Wilber sort of described it as there's traditions that are ascending traditions that are trying to get to the essential. And that humanity's been searching for those for a long time. What's at the basis of all that is? And like many things, when humanity focuses on something, the great thing about our minds is the capacity to sort of telephoto lens in, to focus in. And when someone does that, they are essentially cutting out a lot of things. But you're focusing in so that you can get a real good idea of what that specific aspect of reality is. So the awakening traditions, which point towards simplicity and that everything is 100% spirit and there's absolutely nothing that's out of it, they are a focus of human consciousness, really, tuning into the essential nature of things. And so out of that came a whole series of traditions and practices and essentially sacro-magical approaches to reality that are about doing that. I mean, thank goodness that happened, right? Because otherwise we wouldn't have any idea what we're even talking about when we're talking about non-duality. It would come and you could come and go and you wouldn't even be able to recognize it because there'd be no vocabulary for it. So, but just because there are traditions like that, as you get into them, they tend to be like, they loop, in other words, you get into a tradition and the tradition's about the tradition. The tradition's not about the tradition and everything else because its focus was to try to figure out something specific. And so the pointing out instructions that I came across were written by Wilbur, like I said, and, he basically pointed this out. He said, the great mystics of the world say uncompromisingly that everything is 100% spirit. And he's like, everything, everywhere, at all times. And the very thing you're looking for, you have 100% of. You can't find it because you've already got it. You can't find something you have. And then he commenced to repeat these instructions and explain why these instructions were given. The intention is to frustrate the mind. And the reason I was angry was because I was like, look, I've been doing all this work over the last 20 years that is about transforming the body mind. And now you're telling me that in fact, there was nowhere to go. So now I've got a more transformed, let's say a more fluid, a more happy, a more capable body mind in some ways. So then there's like a kind of anger about like, and the answer is I've always already been there. So I just got freaking annoyed, and sometimes it takes like, that kind of experience to be, I literally took the book and threw it across the room. That's how annoyed I was. I was like, fuck this, And I was just like, well, if that's the answer, then, bring it on.
Yeah.
Screw off reality. If you're already here and there's nothing I can do to get you and I'm the thing in the way, then I'm prepared to die, And so that's where the anger came from. And I think is maybe from a body mind perspective is that anger that generated the possibility for the collapse of the fundamental contraction of the separate self for just the instant that was needed to see through.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of like a hit on the head really hard. You know, you just, woo, you just like the contraction just vanishes for a moment. Or certain drugs can do that to you, and certain experiences, near-death experiences can do that to you. Shamanic experiences can do that to you. I mean, if you read Black Elk Speaks, the guy goes in and boom, bang, he sees the entire universe. It happened, you know, and then he has to come back and sit inside his little mind again. So that's where that anger came from. Now, how do you reconcile those traditions with these really powerful, multivariate, complex traditions? Mm-hmm. It's like that's the sort of oscillation back and forth between the simplicity and the complexity that goes back and forth. You might even say it's the difference between being and doing. How do you reconcile these two really intense things? That tension, the tension between being and doing, the one and the multiplicity, is actually the creative tension for your transformation. Most people are trying to get rid of it. You know what I mean? Like, oh, if I could just get to that super simple place, then all my suffering would go away, and, you know, blah, 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 blah. But the thing is you're an embodied being, and there's no getting away, you know, until you're dead, and then you're a spiritual being. So the tension between being and doing, the tension between the multiplicity and the simplicity, is actually the engine that drives transfiguration. Because if something is driving you crazy in that area, you feel the tension again, and you investigate it, and it transforms you because you want resolution to that tension, and it ultimately undoes another piece of the thing that's in the way. Eventually, enough of those things get transformed that, as Jung said, you grow out of being concerned about the things that previously bothered you because they've been reconciled. The spiritual path is, I mean, the shamanic spiritual path is about the reconciliation of opposites over and over and over again. Even though you know that everything's been ultimately reconciled before it's all begun, in the multiplicity, there's lots of tension. I mean, all the way down to the atomic level. I mean, otherwise we couldn't be here. The tension is what creates reality in the, you know, the outer world. You know, the atomic level is, you know, allows us to have atoms and all these different things. But so oscillating back and forth between the tradition of simplicity and interacting with multiplicity, if you embrace that as part of the process of transformation, then bit by bit you reconcile to all these things that are out there, and you can actually embody both of them. And then how does it arise? So that's the interesting thing. And there's really simple examples to this, you guys, that are very obvious. So like when you're, and I said this in a little piece I read, I mean, I run an art school. So there are times, for instance, when I walk in and I see a dance taking place, and the students are completely in the flow. And being and doing are reconciled. There is no ego dancing in that moment. I mean, it's there, the container's there, right? But it's no longer problematic. It's in the flow. Mm-hmm. It's taking place. And what is coming out in that moment? Grace, beauty, love, passion, all these different things. They're reconciled and also expressing. So there's a universe that inside human beings that's happening then that has reconciled those opposites. So from a multiplicity standpoint, you know, we do this work so that eventually the art of being a human being manifests in the world, whatever that is for you. You know, maybe it's the way you walk your dog. Maybe it's the way you take care of your aging mother. I mean, there's so many examples and ways in which that flow can arise. And when the reconciliation between the opposites has completed, and then another layer begins. And another layer begins. I mean, even if you listen to Adyashanti, he talks about the same thing. Here's a being who's, you know, highly evolved and has reconciled extraordinary opposites in his existence. And he's like, and there's just one more layer, and one more layer. It's like, you know, it goes on and on. I mean, the guy was sick for 6 months in a row, twice, because he had so much built into him that he needed to be a biker. I mean, a racer, not like a motorcycle biker, but, you know, and it's like, you know, so he had to be sick for 6 months to break down the contractions associated with that. So rather than seeing as like the tension as problematic, if you look at it as actually the creative engine for transfiguration, and shamanism gives you that vehicle. If you're just looking from the non-dual view, it's almost hard to see that and to be like, well, what am I supposed to do with it? Now, if you're inside the Tibetan system, it's totally there because they've got these elaborate, you know, processes and empowerments and exercises to do this very work. But if you just abstract it out of it, the non-dual, then you miss, like, how does the creative process transfigure the body mind over a lifetime or many lifetimes or in between your lifetimes?
Yeah.
The reality, the embodied reality that is out in the universe at whatever level, the most refined spiritual level and the most gross level down where we are in terms of like the body, it's ultimately a series of opposites that are, churning and working and creating stuff. And this is the beauty of Druidry. My Druidic teacher, Philip Cargam, I went to the Isle of Iona about 20 years ago, and I was having the same conversation. The same question came up. And we were having tea in the Isle of Iona, which is called the Isle of Druids. And there's wind outside and it's crazy. And, there's 10 or 15 other people there, but I got them alone for a little while. And we're having this conversation. And I was unknowingly searching for the ultimate reconciliation of these two things. And he basically said, stop. He said, drink your tea. And he said, what's the rush? Where are you trying to get to? Why are you trying to reconcile reality, the created reality, and remove it? He's like, then you've removed the process, and there's beauty in the process. So there's it was like a reminder. I mean, he's, 25 years older than me, so he's a lot wiser. So it was like a reminder that the Druidic tradition I came from has no problem with embodiment. I mean, they're not like, Pollyannas. They're like, yeah, man, there's pain, there's suffering, there's violence, there's contraction. But out of that, we create beauty and art, transformation. There's a love of life. There's a love on the deepest levels. The oneness is in love with its creation. And so remembering to embody that. So I think that's how I ended up reconciling that deep philosophical split that sometimes appears in Westerners, which is sort of, I call it my inner desire for escapism and simplicity. And it doesn't mean I stopped having that. I still love that, I mean, give me a dose of Zen any day, man. I love that stuff, right?
The end of the Ramana Maharshi teachings of Who Am I is actually designed to be a wall that helps those opposites.
Yeah.
It's not designed to escape the opposites. The simplicity is designed to be the space where what you just shared is happening.
Takes place, yeah. Because the ultimate reconciliation of those is that there's nothing there anymore.
Is that there's nothing there.
Reality
but it's not
vanishes.
to escape to. It's the alchemical ground. That simplicity is just the alchemical teaching for the same process. So it is all the same process.
Yeah, I think it's the ground in which the process unfolds.
Yeah.
And the beauty of it is that when you are resting in it, I think of it as taking like a bath.
Yes.
Like I'm just like, I can just relax for a minute.
Yeah. Yeah.
And nowhere to go and never has been.
Right. And it creates even more spacious ground for more opposites to continue within.
Yeah.
It can almost actually only occur in this dimension. In other realms of light, there isn't as much time and space to allow opposites to.
Yeah, one of the reasons I think when you run into your spiritual beings on the other side, when you have the capacity and a little bit of the ability to recognize the non-dual, one of the reasons it's easier to work with them is that for them, the compassionate ones, the deeply wise ones, that's the world they live in all the time.
Right.
So, when we go out into consensus reality and you go to Starbucks and everything, you're running into a being that's not recognizing our unity. And so it's harder to like hold that space. So imagine you're going to Starbucks, in the heavens, and everybody who walked in looks at you and everybody sees themselves looking back. And they're like, you want a latte? And you're like, hell yeah. Yeah. And because you're holding a latte, my latte's already full, man. I don't need a latte. We're all lattes, So
It's so awesome actually to be here on Earth where there's so much gap and lag and room for unconsciousness of our nature, because we grow so much in awareness through bringing these opposites together. That is a privilege of being a human being.
Yeah, and this is why the Buddhists say that like a human incarnation is the most valuable one you can have.
Yes, exactly.
If you incarnate in a divine realm, like, well, whatever, man, everybody's got their latte. There's nothing to do,
Right.
or I should say what to do is very, 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 very subtle.
Yes.
And I'm
and
I'm not saying that work also couldn't be incredibly valuable, but the work here is kind of like, it's rough. It's like a soccer game, I mean, it's like,
go so deep into like, it is like a soccer game.
Constantly.
I wish we could go so much deeper into every one of these things.
All right, next question.
Yeah, I'm feeling people really loving this. Kristen said thank you to us both. There is another question about any shamanic communities that you would recommend for anyone that might want to share. But actually, I want to get to that question at the end.
Okay.
Adriana, that we'll go into maybe resources and stuff like that. We have a hand raised, Danny, and then I'd love to kind of do a practice together, a short one.
Great. Yeah.
So Danny, your hand's raised. I'm going to unmute you.
Where's Danny?
Hi. Hi there.
Danny.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so
oh, there you are. Yeah.
Hi, Matt.
Hi. Peace.
So if you answer this, it's I've been looking for this answer since 31 years ago when this happened to me, basically.
Uh-huh.
And so I'm just gonna throw it out there. I was doing a meditation, and my consciousness literally dropped into my hara or center.
Uh-huh.
And I mean, it was, right now everybody kind of feels like, well, let's speak for myself. I feel like my consciousness emanates or radiates from basically somewhere in my head region. It feels like that.
Yeah.
During this meditation, it dropped to, that point below my navel. And literally, it felt like it was radiating out from there. It was a hugely stable, powerful feeling, and very energetic. Since that day, I've had the most difficult time with the energetic flows within my system, and I've just become super sensitive to it. And what you were saying earlier about merging with other world beings, is it possible to do this in that scenario where I didn't intend to do that? Or do you have to actually reach out, and does it have to be to a specific other world being in order to make that connection? Or is it possible I don't know, what do you get, if anything, out of this rambling?
Yeah, it's a good question. So like most of these spiritual exercises, or any kind of exploration in the outer world or the inner world, all kinds of things can go wrong. All kinds of things, accidental things can happen. You can move energy to an area that you didn't intend to, and it can get stuck. So yeah, you can also connect with beings that you don't want to. So just like you connect with people you don't want to. It is like there is a process you want to go through that allows you to develop in a way that has some system to it. So if your situation involves an energetic sort of awakening of your what's called your light body in my tradition, and you dropped your consciousness down into the core, the embodiment body part, and it's like, and a piece of it's still stuck there, then it's sort of like, all right, then working on opening and sort of purifying and balancing your energy system would make sense. So I did that. The system I did through was called Awakening Your Light Body with Oren and Daben. It's just OIRDABEN. I've been using their system for, 18 years. And they have a light body course, and they've abstracted from, almost like Peter Fenner has abstracted or pulled out the essence of the non-dual tradition from a variety of places. They've pulled out the awakening of the light body tradition from Tibetan and Hindu and a variety of other traditions, Sufi, and put it into one system. And they use inner world guides or any otherworldly beings who are compassionate to help you awaken that process. I did it because I couldn't be around 200 kids every day without going totally nutso, and so I needed systems to help me develop the capacity. So I would just point you in that direction because that's my experience. But there, you could also there are systems like the Kundalini yoga is very similar, but you wouldn't want to do that without obviously a good Kundalini teacher, because you could have something else happen. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Right.
You know, so for all you know, that tension down there that is holding something is there for a reason to prevent you from seeing something else. And when it's time to awaken, it will. You know, which could be you looking into something that you haven't heard of. You know, when I was looking for light body stuff, I started with where I knew. I was like the Tibetan stuff and everything, and I realized, okay, they're not going to teach it to me. I'd have to go to a monastery and become a monk to figure it out, right? And it was like, because they don't just hand out this technology because it's potentially dangerous. So then I was just said to the universe and my allies, okay, is there anybody on the planet who teaches this stuff? You know, and will bring it to me. And boom, I found Oren and Deben. And they have, they're the otherworldly beings in charge of it. And they have some shamanic, sort of spiritual practitioners who hold that energy here on the planet. And I think it's Dwayne and Sonia. I can't remember their actual names. I don't really work with them very closely anymore, but I'm constantly using the technology. And it's very powerful, but it's also very safe to develop it. They have a bunch of advanced courses, they're reasonably priced. They're not cheap, but they're also not like, okay, this is ridiculous. It's not a pyramid scheme. The stuff works. So I can tell you that. So if you're looking to investigate that,
yeah, say the names again, please.
Orin, O-R-N, O-R-I-N, and Daben, D-A-B-E-N. And if you put that into a search engine, I think it will just come up.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I would just, suspend your disbelief about their energies are very refined, very subtle, and so when I first started doing it, I was like, what the hell? I don't know what I'm doing here. But Dwayne, who's the guy who channels or brings in Daben, he takes you through the light body stuff. He gives you the sounds, he gives you the images. And it took like 6 months, of working through their very graded development of the light body for me to begin to feel anything. And then, okay. Then eventually I was like, holy crap, this stuff's here.
Okay.
It's
so it's very subtle.
Yeah, and eventually you can feel it more easily, and it's less subtle. And then once that's real for you, now you're walking around in the world as a very different human being. So I do those, to this day, I do those exercises every single morning, and it changes my entire body, mind, and my nervous system, and it allows me more access to the non-dual when I'm walking into consensus reality, and it's distracting. So Peter was right, that the more refined your nervous system, the more open it is, the more capacity you can have to remain centered, essentially, in the non-center, in the non-localized, non-identity self or presence.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Okay. That's seems like a really powerful pointer for me. I'll definitely check that out. And I want to say thank you. And I admire yours and Sarah's very keen intellect, coming from someone I feel very average in that way. And you guys are able to express these deeper truths. And that's just amazing to me and very admirable. And thank you for your service. Both of you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your service, Danny.
Question?
Beautiful. So I heard through a little birdie that let's see, someone is raising their hand physically, so that's probably why I missed it. In Carolyn Porter window, but maybe so Carolyn Porter or Terry Porter, if you're there, just go ahead and unmute yourself. I'm reaching the limits of my iPad right now. I don't see Terry Porter as a participant anymore, or Carolyn Porter. So it could be that they have left the building. Oh no, there they are. I see you. Okay.
Yep, I see them.
I see them too. I'm going to try to unmute them. There we go. I'm going to unmute you guys. For you.
Yeah, there we are. There we are.
You there? Do you have questions? Hi.
Hi, thank you. So could you say, what is your opinion of shamanic traditions that use plant medicine to assist participants in being present to the non-dual or being present to the inner world?
So really good question. I'm glad you brought that up because there is a lot of that out there. Ayahuasca, in particular, is very popular right now. And obviously it's been used throughout history all over the world. And the thing to understand about plant medicine is that there's obviously a chemical piece that has to do with the plant, but there's a spirit connected to the plant that you're actually working with. So the two go together. So that's the first thing. So if that is something that you feel drawn to, those traditions are quite viable, but it's something you absolutely want to do with someone who's a master teacher in it. Just like, you don't want to drop a ton of LSD because you could really mess up your mind. And unless you really know unless you're working with someone who knows what they're doing. So I have a friend who just did this about 2 months ago with a guy in Florida he's been doing it for 35 years. The power and the impact of what that can do to you, it took him a month to recover. And he only did one session, and his body was quaking and letting off energy for an entire month. So he called me and we spent a bunch of time working through what happened. And he was like, okay, my entire worldview is different. I understand there's a whole nother universe and blah, 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 blah. So it's a lot to integrate really, really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
But for some people, those spirits call to them.
Right.
And that's powerful. So I've also worked with a woman named Nikki Scully, who is works with the Egyptian pantheon, the Egyptian deities. She's very powerful. She was married to the manager of the Grateful Dead, and she and the Grateful Dead had enormous access to LSD before it even became illegal, and they were working with those people at the very beginning, and she had really powerful transformative experiences, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then it became illegal, and she was like, okay, wait a minute. How can I create a system for people that don't have to go through this pathway? And she spent the rest of her life doing that. So it would be an and or. It'd be like one of those things where it's like, sure, if you feel called to that, then I would carefully walk that direction and see what happens, and make sure you do it legally, obviously, because there are people who are very capable, but you're gonna have to go to them to do it,
Yeah.
And then, but if you don't, it's absolutely not required at all. I mean, the reality is, like, I have, right here, a drum. And what you need to go into the inner world is this. You don't need to necessarily go through a powerful experience that, rips asunder everything. At the same time, those traditions are incredibly rich and incredibly deep. Mm. And so I think you have a great place to start would be to go in once you have access to your own inner world and your inner world animal and your inner world teacher, which is what we'll do today. You ask them.
Mm-hmm.
Lead me to the teachers I need to work with. Lead me to the thing I need next. It hasn't really been a part of my path. It just hasn't, I mean, even though, peyote and stuff like that is very common in the area in the indigenous traditions around where I'm living in the Southwest, I was very clearly told, nope, that's not your path. Go the path of Druidry, go the path of the Celts, go the path of this. And I was like, okay, that's fine. But I suppose if I had been given to do that, then I would have gone that way,
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So,
thank you.
Yeah, sure. Good question.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Well, you mentioned something we're going to do today. So we have half an hour left.
All right, so that's good. So why don't we do this? Why don't we just take maybe 3 to 5 minute break? Yeah. And then everybody go off, kind of clear out, get the bathroom, you get some water. It's a good idea to drink before you go on an inner world journey, have some water, and then we'll come back and we'll have cleared our space and our bodies and we'll head in. Sound good?
Okay, yeah, let's do 3 minutes, everyone.
3 minutes, here we go.
So, or 4, we'll do 11:33.
11:33.
We'll come back.
Mute.
There we go.
I think I gave everyone a couple more minutes.
Yeah, so let me test this. So Sarah, can
Yeah.
you hear this? Okay, so can you hear this while I'm talking? Hello? Can you hear me? Or is the drum too loud?
I can hear you while you're talking, but I think a little bit softer would be good while you're
Okay.
talking.
So how's that?
That's good.
Good?
Yep.
Okay. Excellent. So the drum is what helps take us into the theta state. You're basically changing your brain waves. But I'm also going to guide you with my voice. All right. So, okay. All right, you ready for a little introduction? So to help you get comfortable with what we're going to do?
Yeah, we're ready.
Okay. All right, you guys. So the first thing to help you get comfortable is every single one of you has the born-in right to access the non-dual and the shamanic. Shamanism was there and has been there for 50,000 years, long before religion was created. Many of the instincts, ceremonial and otherwise, that are part of religion come from us as a species involved in shamanic acts. So there's a couple things that can feel like awkward as a modern person. As awkward as it can feel like doing a prostration to a Westerner is. And prostration is like, going down like this and putting your head on the ground. That act is an act of surrender to the divine, to the all that is. But to the Western ego, it can feel a little awkward until you've done it about 1,000 times. And then you're like, oh, I get it. I'm recognizing I'm part of the universe and I'm not all that is, and that I am all that is. Same thing in shamanism. We basically typically call to the 4 directions. Sometimes we say burn some sage or something like that. So the first few times you do something like this, it can feel awkward. Like, what are you doing? But it's really not. You're just connecting to your own ancestors, honoring the directions. So right now, I'm going to call in the powers of the north. And for me, there's an earth dragon there in the Celtic tradition that embodies the powers of the earth. So I'm going to do that now. And one of the shamanic implements is like a rattle, simple rattle. So I have that, and I have another one. It's a little bit smaller. You just call in the power of the north. And as I'm doing that, or as you do it, you become aware that it has arrived. It's simple. You just invited guests. And then the east. The east represents air, typically an eagle or some other bird. But there's also a dragon there. And she represents the intellect and the rising sun. And my tradition is feminine. And she arises and arrives. And then the west. Also a feminine archetype, feminine being, a goddess of the ocean. And the home of the ancestors. And I call upon them to be present with us, all of us, as all these beings connect to their heritage. and she arrives. And then finally to the south, another dragon, dragon of fire, transformation. The desert, the heat. And for me, there's a lion. And he and she come. And then the invisible one. There's the earth below, the king and queen who sit in the radiant sun in the center of the earth. We call upon their energy of the earth light to rise up and meet us. And the energy of the stars, and the light of the stars, and the consciousness of the celestials to come down and be with us. And finally, the invisible one, present always, radiant. And so with the directions called in, we now can prepare to enter into the inner world. Just gently close your eyes, and we're going to take a journey. I'm going to use a drum, which is a typical instrument as well. Change your consciousness. We're going to go in search of your animal. Whatever you see is what you're meant to see. Whatever you don't see, you're not meant to see. You may see nothing. You may feel, or you may hear, or simply sense. There is no right way or wrong way to enter your inner world. The part of your mind that questions and wonders whether you are doing it right, just put it on the shelf for a minute. Put on the beginner's mind and allow yourself to just go like a child, be led. We're going to go to a forest, but we're going to start by moving inward. I'm going to count from 5 to 1, and I'm going to start drumming. And just follow my voice. I will be going with you. You probably won't see me, but you might. But I will lead you all into the inner world to find your animal, and then we will return. You find yourself in your inner space, surrounded by a mist. And you're floating downward, deeper into the mist. 5, 4, deeper. 3, 2, deeper still. 1. And you see appear before you, or sense, an oak doorway, just floating in space, with a platform in front of it. The entrance to your inner world, the inner castle. Notice the door, and on it is a symbol. This is your symbol. You might be able to see it, you might not, but it's there. You place your hand on the symbol, and the door opens, and you step inside, and you're in a corridor of like a medieval castle. And far down the corridor, you see a light that opens into a courtyard. We're not going to go there right now. Instead, we're going to turn to the right where there's a stairway that heads down. Go into the stairway, go down the stairs, and you find yourself in a room, a beautifully furnished room with a fireplace, a couch with beautiful windows, sunlight coming in. And on the couch is sitting a cat. Just notice its color. Notice if it notices you. is the entry chamber to your inner world, a transitional space, a halfway point. Now you notice that there's an exit from this room on the other side, a stairway, much like the one you came out. Go down over to that stairway, and the stairway goes up, just goes around one spiral, and you come to another room. And this room is not too large, but on the other side of the room is a shimmering portal, another doorway, but the door itself is like filled with light. Notice any other details or sense any details. Approach that portal, and when we step through, we will be moving into the inner world, an inner universe. I will lead the way. Step through the portal, and you find yourself suddenly on the side of a hill, looking out over a vast forest. It is spring, it is sunshine, and there is a field at the bottom of the hill that leads to the edge of the forest. Gaze around. Look to your right, to the north, and there you see mountains, snow-capped. Sense to the far side of the forest, there's a vast ocean. And to the left, to the south, some hills and plains filled with grass and a river. This is your inner world. You notice as you look down at the edge of the forest, there's a trail that leads down the hill to the edge of the forest. Walk with me down that trail now. See the flowers to either side, the grasses. This is a beautiful field, rich with life. And you come to the edge of the forest, and you notice that the trail enters into the forest as well. And there on the right side of the trail is a stone dome about 5 to 6 feet tall. And this stone is tall and narrow and has a symbol on it, like it did the doorway. It's your touchstone. Reach out and touch that stone. Feel yourself grounded at the edge of the forest. And then you notice something. Look to the left and you see an animal step out of the forest, or fly. Whatever kind of animal it is fine. Let that animal come to you and spend a little time communing with your animal. Now it is time to enter the forest with your animal. Start walking down the pathway. You may see it, you may not. Just sense that you're moving through this primordial forest. You can sense the presence of many spirits and also the one that permeates the whole space. You walk down the trail deep into the forest. Until at last, you come to a crossroads at the very heart of the forest. It is a beautiful open clearing where the trees arch overhead and light from the sun slants in, illuminating the beautiful space. And at the center of the clearing is a fountain. This is the water of life and rejuvenation. Go to the fountain, and whatever way you are comfortable, drink from the fountain, put the water on your face, and let all pain and suffering fade away. And then you notice a presence. And you look up, and there's a bench on the other side of the clearing. And on it sits your teacher, whoever he or she may be. Your primary inner world teacher who's there to guide you, teach you about your inner world, and help you. Go now with your animal and sit before your teacher and ask whatever question is most important to you now. It's time to leave, but before you do, take your hands and cup them together and look down and offer your teacher a gift. Whatever appears in your hands is what needs to be given today. Once the exchange is complete, make arrangements to return on your own, to continue the teaching, the investigation into the inner world, and the evolution of your soul. Now it's time to leave, turn, and walk back through the forest. Until you come again to the edge of the forest, and there's the touchstone. Touch the stone to clarify that you've come to the edge of the forest. And now turn to your animal. You're going to bring the energy of your animal back with you into this world, the outer world. Allow your animal to turn into light, golden or silver light. Allow the animal to merge with you. Feel the energy of its strength, its healing, its companionship. And with the power of your animal within you, you can simply transport yourself to the shimmering portal. And you do. Turn and look out over your forest. Many beings await you in the forest, many experiences. Now it's time to step through the portal. Do so. And I am there with you, awaiting you. We are in the portal room, and we are walking across it, and then heading down the stairs and into your common room, the transitional room. And there again is the cat. And it looks up and notices you. You're different. It had been waiting. And then you notice that before you is a table, and on it, a vase. And in it, a flower. Notice what kind of flower it is. If you like, you can take the flower and allow it to merge with you before we leave. Now say goodbye to your common room and your cat. Go across and up the stairs to the portal, the doorway, the back of the door that leads into your inner castle. The door opens and step through, turn around, and the door shuts. Place your hand on the symbol and in your own mind say, "It is done." And then you're rising up through the mist. 1, 2, 3. You are coming out of the inner world, coming back into your own bones. 4. And 5. You gently open your eyes and you're back in this world, in this time. In whatever way you can, reach out, touch the earth, touch wood, anything to ground yourself in this world, in this time. Feel your toes and your feet. You are back 100% in your bones. Okay, guys, welcome back. So just before we maybe do whatever you want to do, for those who want to stay a little longer, there is no wrong way to experience what we went through. If you happen to see a lot, that's fine. You get lost. Some people can follow the whole journey. Some people go in totally different directions. Some people find their animals. Some people find their teacher. There's no right or wrong way. The inner world is actually in charge. The framework I gave you is just a means by which many, many people over thousands of years have gone into the inner world. There's an old Northern European nursery rhyme. Over the hill and through the woods to grandmother's house we go. So that's it. Inside there is the grandmother. She lives in a hut not far from the crossroads. If you'd like to go see her, you're welcome to. Yeah. So that gives you like a basic foundation in finding your animal. Your animal you can go in and see. You can call your animal out into the other world, into the outer world when you want. and it will guide you where you need to go. You can go into the inner world and just say to your animal, take me where I need to go next to learn what I need to learn. Take me where I need to go to heal. Take me to the being I need to meet next. Mm-hmm. Any of those things will work.
I have a feeling right now, Matt, to just, I can, if you can go another 10 or 15 minutes, I can too, for anyone that wants to stay on and talk with Matt about what you just experienced, ask any questions, get any guidance. For those that do need to leave right now, as this was our appointed time to end, if you are any last questions you have that you want to unmute yourself or thank Matt, I will be sending this recording out to everyone who registered, and I'm going to include resources, any resources that Matt and I can compile together. There was a question about, are there communities? I'm sure, Matt, you have some other ones. You mentioned one earlier to Danny. So I'll put resources. You can always work with Matt, correct? In one-on-one.
Yeah, sure.
Work? Are you offering that? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I have a limited amount of time, obviously, because I have a full-time job and 2 teenage boys. But, I mean, I can work on one-on-one with people, and then also direct you to a variety of different resources that help support you. And I'm willing, for anybody who showed up today, I'm certainly willing to have an initial conversation and be like, okay, how can I help you move in the right direction?
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, and I am too. So I'm also willing to have a one-on-one conversation with anyone here, help you with the right direction, whether it's with me or anyone else. Let me see, we have it. Yeah. So a lot of people are saying thank you. That's great. So I'll send out resources with the video. So if anyone needs to go now, please do. And if anyone wants to stay on for another 10 or 15 minutes, Matt, if you have that time, we can open it up.
Sure.
To share, any questions? What'd you go through? But a lot of people are saying goodbye and thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Bob. Yeah. Thanks, John. Nice to get little notes from people.
I know, it's so cute. I'm getting emails and it's so cute, so nice. I know
Yeah.
Facebook Live lets you see everyone's little comments in the moment.
Yeah, it's cool.
I know. So go ahead and press raise hand if anyone has anything, or
I unmuted myself. Is that okay?
Or unmute yourself if you can't figure out the raise hand.
I have a couple questions, Matt. I really, I got a lot out of that. I was one of those, I was able to stick with it all the way through. It was beautiful and it was deep. And I wonder, can you suggest a good way to do this process again on my own? Because I really, without, going long story, I'll just say that I'm really drawn to this. I have Native American in my genes, my past lives, everything. So
well,
I'm really drawn to this. So what's a good way, that to do this on my own?
Is, for instance, it's you can use the recording that we just did. So for instance, you'll have access to that. I mean, the simplest way is to actually play back the recording of this part of the piece, close your eyes and just let the whole thing happen again. And then in the empty spaces where there's time, right, you can actually, go experience what you need to experience. And then what I would do is, since you have control over it at that point, you can also, let's say you get in there and you're at the fountain, right? And you meet your teacher and your teacher's like, hey, we're going to go meet grandmother. And you're like, oh, okay. You just pause it. There's a way.
Oh, I gotcha. Yeah.
Pause it. You say, oh, man, I mean, because, you can go, it turns out you can go you can go super deep, you can go medium deep, and you can go light. And so a lot of my journeys, I'll use also a drumming app, you can get on your phone. You can get
Insight Timer or something. Yeah.
And there's the drumming app itself is actually really helpful. You can put it on really low and then it can take you through. But I would do the journey that I just gave you, as many times as you need to. It might be 3 times, it might be 30 times until you're like, hey, this place is really solid for me now. And my animal is taking me to the south. Gee, what's there? Well, there's a river with a bridge over it, turns out. And that
it felt really solid already. I mean, it was really incredible, actually. I was really surprised.
Well, and the reason is because this is not something that I made up. It's something I found. And then, as I found this inner world, I years later, found other people who'd actually traversed the same pathway. So what you're doing is when you connect to a specific lineage, you realize that a living tradition doesn't really belong to any one person. It's something that was accumulated through thousands of years. So that's why there's a nursery rhyme about going over the hill to grandmother's house we go. It's like, because it's actually part of the culture for Northern Europeans in particular. And every part of the world would have their own. If you come from a part of Africa, it would have that one. If there's a Native American one, depending on which part of the Native American tradition you're coming from, they would have their own. So this is just one way to work with it. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And lastly, how to contact you to take advantage of that little one-on-one follow-up you said you'd do.
Yeah, I have a website. It's just matthewthomasbaker.org. And on there's a way that you can contact me. And then we can go from there. And we would just Zoom. I would just set up a Zoom,
Cool.
and then and the other resources would just be on Sounds True and stuff. You can get stuff for different shamanic courses by Sandra Ingerman and stuff like that. And those are very valuable. I work with a woman named Carla Meesk. She's my shamanic teacher. You can check her out as well. Meeske. She's been doing it for 30 years. And her training was through the Foundation for Shamanic Studies, and they're good. But there's a new one called the Society for Shamanic Practitioners.
Whoa, you go so fast here. Well, I guess it's recorded.
It's all being recorded, yeah. So the Society for Shamanic Practitioners is a kind of newer one that has a nicer website, lots of resources, and I'm on that one. And like I said, as you start to go through this, if you get to a place where you're like, hey, I'm interested in this, but I'm not sure, you can just shoot me an email or something like that and be like, what do you think of this? And the great thing, like what my shamanic teacher does with me, like I'll ask her a question, she'll be like, go do a journey and ask. And it's sometimes it's hard to do journeys for yourself. So, I mean, there's a continual like learning to rely on your own spiritual resources that is really part of this tradition. So
that's what it's all about right there.
Yeah. I mean,
ultimately,
basically, you live in a shamanic universe then, and you have all these allies and guides, and they help you, and then we help each other. I mean, she does journeys to help heal me, and I do journeys to help heal other people, because when it is someone else, it's actually easier to do the work sometimes. Yeah. So yeah.
This is where it gets so obvious that there really isn't a separation between this kind of shamanism and non-duality, and that when you go within, you really discover how obvious it is there's only one consciousness.
Yeah.
There's your consciousness, there's this that you are that has all of the answers. In that way, it's exactly the same teachings as Advaita, Vedanta, or any other non-dual lineage.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Thanks, Danny. I'm gonna, I took some notes and I'll put these resources in email again. Yeah, go ahead and unmute yourself, who's ever still on, if you have anything.
I wanted to ask a question. Can you hear me?
Go for it.
Yeah, who is it? Ken?
Yeah, that was quite deep. I don't know whether you want to answer a specific question. I kept seeing ram horns where I was touching the touchstone and on the door, and then it seemed like a ram was the animal. And then when we walked in to ask for the guide was the character from the Lord of the Rings. The guy with the beard. I can't remember his name.
Gandalf.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you? I mean, what does a ram mean? I actually could feel that sense of ram combining with me.
Yeah.
So my question is sort of like, okay, so what does all that mean? I mean, it felt powerful, but
right. So I'll give you an example. For instance, one of the systems I use that is helpful is so here's a picture of a ram. Okay. And that comes from this book, which is out of the tradition I'm a part of, the Druid Animal Oracle. So my original Druidic teacher, Philip Cargom, and his wife, Stephanie, did a lot of research in England when they still could access the old Christian sort of descriptions of early shamanic work in Saxony, you know, and so they created an oracle system with all these animals, and the ram is part of it. And so that gives you sort of some of the stories and history behind the ram, and also what the ram represents. So that gives your mind a place to go. In fact, the Druid Animal Oracle was the thing that started me out on my path. I just walked into a bookstore and there it was, and I had to get it. And it's so well researched and so well done that it gives you access to like these really deep stories inside the Western Celtic lineage and Saxon lineage. Then from there, you can be like, oh, okay, that's sort of what the ram represents. And then you go back to the ram and you work with it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a ram, just from off the top of my head, my own experiences of the ram is an incredibly grounded creature. And so it has to do with that stability, that ability to be like high on the rocks, but be balanced, you know? And so if that becomes what's called your power animal or your companion animal, you have that, basically be able to bring that power with you into the world. It may be something that you're already very familiar with. And it's just sort of like, oh gosh, that's kind of a little bit of who I am. I didn't even realize that. But now you're articulating it and seeing the other being that's always kind of been with you. And now you can talk to it and it will lead you where you need to go next.
Mm-hmm.
So it acts as like a guide and a protector and a source of power and energy. And then there's the outer world descriptions. And so you could read all those stories and descriptions in that book. And then you could be like, okay, what pops out to you as being authentic for your relationship with the ram? Not taking any particular book as like an authority, but rather as the stories as being a resource pool. Because when you're dealing with a living tradition like this, the one I'm handing on to you guys comes from a very specific place, you know, and so that's the energy that you guys are being drawn into. And that, if you feel connected to that, then that's great. But you might also be like, oh, and that leads you to Africa, you know, it just depends, you know. So I would encourage you.
As far as the guide, do you find when you're in touch with the guide that you're actually hearing them speak to you, or how do you?
It depends. The inner world often communicates through very powerful symbolic images or senses. So sometimes, depending on the frequency my brain kind of has gotten to, I will hear like a voice, specific voice, and it'll be like a dialogue that goes on, almost like a Socratic dialogue. And that'll happen sometimes. Other times, it's much more ceremonial and symbolic and powerful, where there's a transmission taking place. So for instance, I'll offer something and she will take it, right? And then they'll offer something back and then it gets part of my body. So there can be a linear conversation some people have, and there can be this deep symbolic, almost poetic form of communication that is image-based or sense-based. All of it is appropriate and fine. The only time you have issues, and the only time I've ever seen real issues, is someone who specifically suffers from schizophrenia. And that is something you do have to be careful with if it's in your family or something you're working with, because the abilities that we're using are similar to those in the sense that you're having a conversation. The difference is with schizophrenia is you run into that those voices then take, you know, they become viscerally so much more real and impossible to stop. Whereas you'll notice that like once you come back to your consciousness, you're in charge. I mean, you're the operational, you know, you're the operating center. Do you know what I mean? Even though you might be surrendering to a teacher who's going to teach you at a moment, you're not surrendering your gold, your power ultimately. You know, the outer self is the thing in charge out here, working with those allies to help you. I mean, it makes sense. Otherwise, how's anything going to get done? You know, we're not trying to become possessed by something is what I'm trying to say, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
And the other observation I've spent some time with a number of non-dual teachers and felt a sense of expansion and part of everything. And what I was noticing when we were going through this was there was both this sense that I was experiencing this and also that which was aware of what I was experiencing. So
you got it.
Two pieces seem to be
yeah. They're both active and they're not actually in conflict with each other.
Right.
Yeah. And for whatever reason, it's almost, for some people, it's easier to do that, to hold both of those things in the inner world than it is out in consensus reality. My hunch is, I don't know this, but my hunch is it's because from the spirit world's perspective, it is more obvious that we're one.
Yeah.
And like, not for every spirit. I mean, there can be lost fragments of minds, where that are totally confused, whatever. That's different. But when you're dealing with, advanced compassionate beings, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and you're not stuck in a physical body, but instead you're stuck in whatever kind of bodies they have. They're more refined, they're more subtle. So becomes more obvious what you're talking about. So that can be helpful for us,
And then one last observation I noticed, and I can't remember which part of the guided piece this happened, but there was a place where I could feel as though I was going deeper and deeper and deeper. And then there was a sense of fear, nothing strong.
right?
Like, oh, I've been here before. This feels a little, that kind of it wasn't enough to throw me out
Pop
of it.
out of it. Yeah.
I was just aware of it.
Yeah. And so that's why the first place you go is to get your animal, because from this point forward, your animal can actually meet you in your transitional common room. Like when I go in now, basically, I go in and bam, my lion is there, and she's like, hey, how you doing? And I'm like, whoa, good to see you. And she'll typically lead me out through the portal. And then we kind of go do work together. And sometimes other animals will show up, sometimes it's a flying horse and stuff like that, which is the goddess Epona, actually. And so depending on where we're going. So once you get comfortable with your animal, that sense of fear of going into the underworld or the middle world or the upper world on your own, yeah, I mean, it's like going on any journey. It's tough to get on a train, not know where you're going, So having a good guardian with you is really helpful. But that's normal.
Yeah.
The sense when you're going in there, you're going into a deep place in the unconscious.
Yeah, I mean, think of it that like when you change your brainwave frequency, from a Jungian perspective, you would be going into your initial personal unconscious, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then when you go through the portal, you're actually moving into the collective unconscious.
Okay.
Now, a portion of that collective unconscious belongs to you, the forest, the whole thing, but it's populated at the crossroads with beings who come and show up. So that's a psychological way of explaining it, which I think from a Jungian perspective is really helpful. The important thing to understand is that like these energies affect us in a very real way. And so just like Jung said, like interacting, going too deep into the unconscious is not a healthy thing for most people. So this allows you to go into a light trance and then have guidance as you go and get the part that you needed next to do whatever you need to do, So it's safe then, as much as transfiguration can ever be safe, right?
Right. So the fear then is perhaps of seeing something or feeling something that's been in a way blocked off from like
yeah, like the fear of the unknown, a fear of something that might show up. I mean, once you get into real difficult dismemberment journeys where like you're going to a place, like I would go across the forest into the ocean to the bottom of the ocean where there's a cave, and this goddess who's from the West, right? And her sharks would come in and just rip me to pieces. I mean, the first time that happened, I was like, holy shit, what's going on? I'm scared of sharks, in the real world, you know what I mean? But once I allowed myself to go through it, I mean, I had done hundreds of journeys by then, Once I allowed myself to go through that, I realized, oh, they're actually my allies. They're ripping apart the tensions, much like a Tibetan, bodhisattva who appears as a wrathful demon is doing, and then boom, boom, being ripped apart. And then I would actually just turn into an energy body and go before the goddess and be like, okay, what do I need to be doing here? And she would do something and transform me and come back a little different. So as you can imagine, those journeys become a little bit more advanced and they take time. So first you start with your animal and then your teacher, and then maybe go visit grandmother's hut and a variety of other simpler journeys.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm glad it was helpful. Any other questions? Let's see here.
Can the animal change? Your totem, your spirit animal, can
Yes.
that change?
Yes.
Because years ago I did one, and it was always a black bear, and this time was very, very clearly a crow, a raven.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. It can change over time, and I worked through a variety of different animals over time, and that's fine. They'll kind of let you know. And sometimes very specific helper animals will come in as you're dealing with a very specific issue. You can ask for that, actually. You can ask for, will the animal, like let's say you go in and your crow is taking you into the forest and you're looking to work on some part of your life, outer or inner life, and you're like, hey, can you please lead me to the animal that will help me with this? And it'll take you to that animal. And then you can check. You can say, is this the animal? So like actually, when I'm actually looking for a specific animal to help me, I typically go to the grandmother's hut, and in there is a wolfhound. And the wolfhound is the one that finds me the animal.
Yeah.
So we go, so my lion, myself, and my wolfhound all go looking through the forest, and then we find something, and then I ask the dog, I go, is this the right one? And if it growls, it's not. And if it wags its tail, it is. It's pretty simple.
Yeah, Danny, there's lots of different animals for lots of different things.
Yeah, tons.
There's so many different ones with so many different functions and different personalities, and they like to work together. And
yeah.
Well, I was surprised at mine because I feel like I need a lot of grounding, and a beast of the air isn't exactly grounded, and being a pilot in real life also is there and is not grounded. But that seems to be connected to the difficulty I talked about earlier, where that energetic flow in my body is just going rampant.
Yeah.
And so I don't know what to take away from all that, really. That it's a raven.
Ravens are really powerful. They often work with the energy of reconciling opposites inside. And so
reconciling opposites, I can't believe you said that. That's the most difficult aspect of awakening for me is the opposites, feeling this exact same diametrically opposed forces or what have you to the exact same degree at the exact same time is killing me. I don't know why.
The ravens are remarkable because they have the power to reconcile life and death, because they feed off of essentially death and they transform it into life. And they're very bright. They're very smart, obviously. And so it's a great animal for you to work with if you're trying to work on reconciling opposites. And same thing, the Druid Animal Oracle has a raven in it. And you can read about their history and who they are and what they work on. The other thing to know is that when you're dealing with an animal, you're not dealing with one animal or the spirit of one animal. You're dealing with the spirit of all ravens, all lions, all turtles, all bears. So this is an incredibly wise, deep being that contains enormous amounts of power and energy. And so sometimes I'll go in and I'm working with, say, my lion, and it's like, or the lion, all lions, and both a masculine and a feminine lion will show up. And it's like something's going on between the masculine and feminine. And then all of a sudden there'll be a bunch of, little cubs, little lions, and all of a sudden they're all over me or something. It depends on what's going on. So like this being you're dealing with that represents lions or represents ravens is significantly in some ways larger than our individual ego, because it has access to the entire history of that particular species or subspecies throughout the history of Earth. I mean, still an animal consciousness, but that consciousness has a deep wisdom. And we as human beings, for most of our history, we're actually working closely with them. It's only recently that we're like, not so connected to all the different animals out in the world.
Or out and out killing them off.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions before we head out? It's been lovely.
Yeah,
Actually,
oh, you got one? Okay. Two.
It's
just real quick. My experience with the lion brought together my Hindu roots, very strong Hindu roots, and up came the goddess.
Yeah.
And I realized that Durga was accompanying me and the lion. And then my desire now, as I'm finished, is to just be on the lion, realizing it's the oneness with Durga and the fearlessness and a tremendous compassion.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to share that with you because my background is so old and so strong in the Hindu.
Yep.
Teaching and practicing, and this it blended both. So beautiful.
Great.
Yeah,
I think that's wonderful, because what you find is underneath these old traditions like Hinduism and the Celts and all these things is the shamanic origins of those religions. And so you find Durga and you find the lion, and you'd be like, oh my gosh, they're related, you know? And so same thing, I'll go in and I'll find an animal or something and I get led to a goddess, you know? Like, so the goddess might come from the upper world or the lower world, but the animals become these means by which we can actually access really, really vast beings, you know, that are there for humanity's evolution, and that you've been connected to probably through many, many incarnations. You know, and they're all of a sudden they're like, oh, welcome home, you know?
And so spontaneous, because we were in such an innocent place.
Yes.
Felt so innocent that, yeah,
exactly. There is an innocence to going back to the inner world, because you're using some of the faculties of your mythic mind, you know, your kind of early childhood mind that sees the whole universe as being connected. And in many ways, the deities exist at that level, at this really profound mythic level in which they know they're utterly one with everything, but they're also specific aspect of that everything. And that's kind of what our rational minds and the rational development of, you know, our modern world left behind. And so when we tap into it, we're like, whoa, this is profound. And it is profound. And it's wondrous and magical too. There's like almost like a reclaiming of a childhood wonder, which is great, without losing your modern rational sense of, you know, practicality and reason, which we don't want to give up, obviously, because it's very helpful.
Right. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm so glad. I'm so happy for you. All right. And then there was another question. Was that David?
Yeah, it's not a question. I just want to share my experience.
Oh, great.
Extremely interesting, very involved, and simple at the same time.
Yeah.
I really picked up on the energies. The energy of the lion, the energy of the cat, the energy of the heart on the door. I mean, I saw, but I felt the energy, and I don't know if I was having a non-dual and shamanistic experience all at once, because I felt as though it was all happening. Actually, it's hard to even talk about it.
Yeah.
It was all kind of, well, that's all I'll say. It was. I really did feel that way. And it's kind of interesting because I woke up at 2 o'clock this morning and did a little email to Sarah, put out a couple of questions. And also at the moment, I am dealing with some remnants of trauma, very early childhood trauma. I actually proceeded to revise an email that I started 2 years ago to send to my sister, which is basically just speaking about my truth. Because in trauma, you can't get to truth. You can't speak up because of the traumatization. It's lost in the shadow. And there was just so much clarity. There's so much clarity in doing it, and it was easy to do it. And I haven't been able to do it because it's been absolutely difficult to do because of what was in the trauma.
Yeah.
And after I did that, I woke this morning. I felt so much peace. And then after doing this journey with you, I feel a real richness inside. It feels rich.
Yeah, nice.
There's a connection inside of different parts.
Yeah.
Different energies, you know, the courage of the lion, the wisdom of the teacher, the heart, and it's
you got it.
I mean, I don't know what else to say.
Well, one of the primary things that happens in shamanism is as you heal something and you remove something from your system that was traumatic, is they replace it with other energy. And so that's that wonder that you feel. So we went into the underworld, like, so you just let something go, and then you went into the inner world and you replaced it with the energy, this positive energy of your animal and your teacher, and then you feel that energy inside you. So instead of having the contraction, you have this openness and this
Well,
full.
it's all working together.
Yes.
It's all working together. It's not. It's yeah. It's a work in progress.
Yeah, it's an endless work in progress, and it's
So the contraction going to the expansion to
refilling it with something else. It's spiritual healing, basically.
yeah.
You know, and so it gives us energy and gives us power and gives us more wonder and capacity to continue on the journey. You know, it's quite nice. Well, congratulations. That's really wonderful.
I feel the energy in my body.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, sometimes you can really feel like a surge.
It's not. It's not. It's just energy. I can feel this. It's just there, a tingling all through my whole body.
Yeah, that's great.
You're a great guy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thanks a lot.
yeah, it was very good. You did a really good job.
Oh, thank you
Yeah.
so much.
I had no real inclination to sort of check shamanism out,
Yeah.
except my dear friend Sarah. I mean, the loving oneness showed up, and that was the invitation, and
Yeah.
I put it to you. So thank you very much.
Oh, you're very welcome. And that's why I did it, actually. I feel like there's a community of people who have the potential to tap into this, particularly with the background in non-duality,
Yeah.
that would just add a richness that is just wonderful.
You're right. It is rich. It's rich.
Yeah.
I do feel a richness.
Yeah, without getting lost in the multiplicity, with always remembering that there's this non-dual space behind it all. And all the great shamans point to that, you know, and so we're already talking about it. We're already pointing it to, so why don't we reclaim the other half and allow that richness to come into our life and the healing that comes from it, quite honestly, and the power, you know, so that we can be a greater healing presence in the world. I mean, it's not a mistake that the Tibetans call it the ultimate medicine, but there's lots of medicine, it turns out, from the inner world.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, David, so much. So, diehards,
Yes.
12:30. Please let me know if you're watching this video or you're still on. Send me an email and let me know if this served you, if this really impacted you. I think Matt and I are both feeling this interesting call to be shared to the non-dual community. So
maybe we'll create one.
Yeah.
Right?
Let's see what happens. Yeah. Let's see. Just
one journey a week. Sounds good to me.
Yeah, I know. We could do that.
We totally could, you guys. I mean, it sounds like fun to me.
It sounds like super fun to me. So if it sounds like fun to you, send love@nondualcenter.org an email. Let us know.
All right, guys. Have a great Sunday afternoon. Okay, everybody?
Okay, I'm going to everyone really quick, and you can all say goodbye. Go ahead and everyone say goodbye.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Take care, guys.
Let's see.
Bye, Matt.
Thank you, lovely.
Thank you.
Bye.
Lovely oneness.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay.
Ciao, guys.
Bye. See everyone.